In 1867, on March 19th, the White Earth Reservation was formed by a treaty signing between the U.S. government and the Mississippi Band of Chippewa. The treaty was signed in Washington, D.C. 10 Ojibwe chiefs met with the President Andrew Jackson in the White House to negotiate the terms of the treaty, and then in 1868 the chiefs moved to the reservation with their followers. Many generations later, because of the treaty continuing to restrict natives and try to separate them from the land, it
The story of our creation begins after the battle of Wenabushu and the evil spirit known as Manadun. After this, because of the rising water, Wenabushu is then stranded in a pine tree. He sees animals swimming around him, and he asks each one to take turns diving down to the bottom of the water and bring up little earth so they can all survive. A loon, an otter, and a beaver all try to help him with his request, but they all drown before they can bring back any dry land. The muskrat goes last, but he runs out of air before he reaches the surface. Wenabushu praises the muskrat for his efforts and mourns his death. But then he realizes he is holding a few grains of sand in a little bit of mud. Wenabushu brings the muskrat back to life with his breath and then rolls the mud in his hands. He makes a large enough surface for the animals to climb out of the water and forms a small island. He sends a huge bird to fly around the island and make it bigger. After flying around for 4 days, a magic number, the bird returns and Wenabushu says the island is still not big enough. So he sends an eagle to make it bigger. Once the earth is created, Wenabushu decides it is where all his relatives can make their home. Finally, Wenabushu names all the growing things and lets the natives know which they can use and how. The Ojibwe lived throughout the northeastern part of North America and along the Atlantic coast. Due to a combination of prophecies and tribal warfare, around 1,500 years ago, the Ojibwe people left their homes along the ocean and began a slow migration westward that lasted many centuries. Ojibwe oral history and archaeological records provide the evidence that the Ojibwe moved in slow, small groups, following the Great Lakes westward. By the time the French arrived in the Great Lakes area of the early 1600s, the Ojibwe were established at Sault Ste. Marie and the surrounding area. An Ojibwe prophecy that urged them to move westward to the land where the food grows on water was a clear reference to the wild race and served as a major incentive to migrate westward. Eventually, some bands made their homes in the northern area of present-day Minnesota.
1803, President Thomas Jefferson purchased the territory of Louisiana from the French government for $15 million. The Louisiana purchase stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains and from Canada to New Orleans, and it doubled the size of the United States. To Jefferson, westward expansion was the key to the nation's health. He believed that a republic depended on an independent, virtuous citizenry. For its survival, in that the independence and virtue went hand in hand with land ownership, especially the ownership of small farms. Those who labor on earth, he wrote, are the chosen people of God, in order to provide enough land to sustain this ideal population of the virtuous yeomen. The United States would have to continue to expand. The westward expansion of the United States is one of the defining themes of 19th century American history. But it is not just the story of Jefferson expanding the Empire of Liberty. On the contrary, as one historian writes, in 6 decades after the Louisiana Purchase, westward expansion very nearly destroyed the Republic. The natives' relocation was either voluntary or forced. Army and militia patrols supervised the tribe's westward migration. It is estimated that between 1830 and 1840, the government relocated more than 70,000 Native Americans, thousands of whom died along what came to be known as the Trail of Tears.
The White Earth Reservation was created on March 19, 1867 during a treaty signing in Washington, D.C. 10 Ojibwe chiefs met with President Andrew Johnson at the White House to negotiate the terms of the treaty, creating the White Earth Indian Reservation. In the early 1890s, about 85 boarding students and 6 sisters posted in the inner court of St. Benedict's Mission School. Record keeping for this large group of children was not simple. While the churches constructed and operated their schools on the reservations, government policy allowed the schools an annual appropriation of a flat rate for tuition, board, and clothing annually. The treaty was engineered to concentrate the Ojibwe people in a single place, encourage them to farm through the allotment of the land to individuals, and open pine forest logging. The Ojibwe people lost control over Minnesota by 95% to 2.1 million acres. But the treaty provided the three tribes about $16,000 in goods and $3,000 to establish schools.
The short-term effects of the treaty started when the Indian Reorganization Act was passed in 1934. Tribal governments assumed the responsibility for enrolling tribal members and setting the conditions for such enrollment. The way that the people had to adjust from everyday life was also difficult for them.
The long-term effects of the treaty affect the culture, language, and traditions. We still practice the traditions passed down from our elders, but our lifestyle has changed. One of the major effects is that to be enrolled, you have to be 25% or 1/4 Minnesota Chippewa. This is because the United States federal government implanted the 1/4 degree of Indian blood, or blood quantum, as a criteria for services provided by the government after the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. It pressured many tribes to do the same. In 1981, the White Earth Band of Chippewa versus Alexander reaffirmed the tribal treaty rights for tribal members on the reservation to hunt, fish, and gather wild rice, free of state regulations on all land within the White Earth Reservation. Another impact is the drug and alcohol problems many people have on the White Earth Reservation. 10% of Native Americans have some kind of substance abuse. Many kids are taken from their homes with substance abuse and forced to live with strangers or others in their family. The fourth impact is that our culture is dying. It's disappearing. The younger generations don't know much about the culture, language, and traditions. Most of the first-speaking elders have died. Only a few remain. One of the main reasons why our ways are dying is because of the Religious Crime Code of 1883 that banned the practices and traditions of Native American people. This continued until 1978, when the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978. This allowed Natives to practice the traditions and ceremonies. The people in White Earth are trying to restore the culture. They are teaching the ways to the younger generations. The local school districts are offering culture classes such as beading and quillwork, Ojibwe language, traditional art, and pottery. They teach kids in elementary school how to speak the language and how to use the materials around them. People still harvest wild rice every year, and sometimes the school has an opportunity to take a few kids ricing during ricing season.